Hi. As we're wrapping up the term, we're starting to think about the long-term view, both the long-term for your work in social justice and the long-term for a social perspective on where we want society to go. So starting first with you and your work, one of the things I really want to point out is that you have had very specialized training that most people don't get. So we kind of need you on the team. Not a lot of people devote 100 hours to social justice learning. And so the fact that you have this amazing skill set and this set of knowledge means that we could really use you on the team because there's not very many of us that are trained. One of the things I really want to help you work on is how to develop stamina for lifetime work, and recognizing that this work can be really heartbreaking. Social change goes really, really slowly, and you will lose over and over again. And how to get up the 20th time after 19 defeats, recognizing that it's really hard to keep going when the days are hard. One of the things is to know that this is the pattern, is recognizing that social change will break your heart, that this is not surprising, that we are trying to change the status quo, and that there's a lot of power fighting to keep things the way they are. So bracing and recognizing that this will happen over and over again can help you develop the patience to keep going with the work when it's really hard. Another thing is to recognize that this is very slow to happen, and we are used to thinking about short-term responses and saying like, well, I went to the march and nothing happened, so why would I keep going to marches if nothing happens? And understanding that social change comes from a lot of things all at once is when we have a set of people creating a movement. That's when we start to see things happen. It won't be one action that does it. It'll be a whole joint accumulation of things. In thinking about a historical perspective, sometimes it helps me get a better sense of what I'm looking at. So just thinking about the right to vote for white women in the United States, just that one thing took at least 80 years of dedicated work. So between the 1840s and 1920s, there were a lot of women pushing really hard to make sure that women could have the access to the vote. And even within that, there were a lot of problems, a lot of racism happened. So in the end, the right to vote was only secured for white women. But one of the things I really want to emphasize is this 80 years thing, is we hear about this stuff in the history books, and mostly what we hear is, oh, and women got the vote, without recognizing that there were hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people working really hard on this for decades and decades, and they weren't seeing the fruit of their labor. So somebody may have worked this for 30 years, and then pass the torch on to somebody who worked it for another 30 years, and then pass the torch on to somebody who worked it for another 20 years. So how those folks stayed focused and kept working without feeling defeated and giving up hope is something that I really want us to think through, is recognizing that you won't necessarily see the outcome of what you're doing. And as I look back, I'm really grateful to the grandmothers and how they helped make sure that I could live in a world where I can vote. And I now take that for granted. And that was a relatively simple change, right? It was pretty much just adding a few little words, and women too. They didn't have to restructure any political parties. They didn't have to create new polling stations. They didn't have to rewrite the entire electoral process. They just needed to add, and women too. So a relatively small change was really, really hard to come to. Now, when we're thinking about much bigger changes and changing structures, we got to brace and get ready and say, this is not going to be fast. But I really want to make sure I leave something much better for my grandchildren. Thinking about some of the risks that could keep you from being able to continue in social justice work, I want to give you some of the tricks that I use. Recognizing first that one of the bigger risks that we have is losing you to burnout. So we got to make sure that you know that burnout is a likely thing to happen, and how to brace for it, and how to get ready, and how to get out of it when it comes. The other thing is there's a high risk of feeling like you're not good enough. So perfectionism can be a really big obstacle in keeping you from doing the work. So let me start with perfectionism first. We have this notion that to be racist or to be sexist is to be immoral and to be a bad person, right? This is the good-bad binary we started out with at the beginning of the term. And that if anybody commits one of these mistakes, that they are a bad person, instead of recognizing it as a mistake from somebody who's learning. And since somebody is learning, we want them to be really focused on learning from their mistakes. So a good learning skill would be recognizing, oh, I made a mistake. Let me see what went wrong. and how can I fix it for next time? That would be how we would learn well. However, we get really stuck in the shame spiral of saying, I am a horrible, horrible person. I am a shameful, horrible, unethical human being. And then we don't want to hear the feedback. We don't want to learn from the mistakes. We just kind of want to hide them and get away from them as fast as possible. And this happens a lot with social justice work. We want to get ready to think of a mistake as a learning opportunity. And I know it really sounds cheesy, but there's an analogy that I like, right, which is the spinach in the teeth analogy. When somebody lets you know that you've got spinach in your teeth, it can be really embarrassing, but you want to get ready and brace and say, oh my God, okay, thank you for letting me know. Now I can get to that. Otherwise, you're walking around with spinach showing in your teeth. When somebody lets you know that you've made a social justice mistake, it can be really embarrassing and really overwhelming. But what we need is for you to pick up fast and be able to go, okay, let me learn from this. Let me fix it as fast as I can and keep going. So beware of those perfectionism traps. Those are likely to get you burnt out fast. And when it comes to burnout, a really good thing is to, first of all, know that it exists and recognize the pattern and how it shows up for you. It may be that for you, it's really based on irritability. It could be that you're just sad all the time. Or it could be that you just don't want to hear about it anymore. And knowing those symptoms and how they show up for you can help you identify it faster and say, oh, I'm in burnout right now. Having a pre-planned, pre-thought plan of action would be a really good thing, and say, okay, I know that when I'm in burnout, what really works for me is to make sure that I can hang out with my friends, get some sunshine and exercise, go to my favorite movie. Whatever it is, knowing what works for you will get you out of that cycle much faster. I use a trick that works well for me, is recognizing that since we will lose and lose and lose many times in a row when it comes to social justice work, I keep a very tight hold of things that go well. So I keep a list that I call my hope bucket list, where I write down the things that have gone really well. Whenever we have a victory, I write it down and I celebrate it really, really big, because I know that they're few and far between. And when things are feeling like there's absolutely no hope and nothing can change, I can go back to my list and say, no, we have won. We do win. We win all the time. It's just really, really slow. So that is one of my favorite tricks on the very, very hardest days. And the hard days really do come. And when they do, I pull out my list and read, and it helps me feel a little bit better. I also try to make sure to stay away from situations that really suck out my hope. I kind of think of hope as a very fragile, limited resource. And when people really pull on it, it can get really draining. So if I know that there is a set of events or experiences that are really draining for me, I'll avoid them and say, I won't be having that Facebook fight, or I won't be going to that particular training with that particular trainer because I know it's going to make me feel really crappy at the end. So I'm going to hold on to the very little hope I have, and I'm not going to hang out that much with the folks who are stuck in cynicism and pain. I will work with them, but I'll make sure to protect the little hope I have, because it's a really fragile resource, and it's my most important tool as a social justice activist. In thinking about how to imagine a better world, we are using the word radical, which means from the root up. We have a lot of negative connotations associated with radical, as if it's violent, as if it's dangerous. A lot of times we don't even know what the word means, but we know that it's kind of icky. Radical means change from the root up. And if we start to think about, like, for example, the analogy of a tree, if we just change the leaves a little bit, we may not get as big of a result as if we can go from the root to the trunk all the way up to the leaves. So if we're trying to reimagine an entirely new society, we want to have at least the intellectual capacity to say, I want to imagine something better. And utopia is a very good tool for recognizing which direction you want to move into. It doesn't mean that you'll achieve it, but it gives you a path and a direction. Say, I want to go that way, not that other way. The story of solution asks us to think about ways that we can use our genius, the bright minds that we have available to us, in a better way of having them imagine a better society. Sometimes when I do this exercise with students, they get really hung up on the magical technology, and they'll say, oh, we will invent the perfect plastic and all will be solved then. We could even rethink of society pretty much with the stuff that we have now, with the technology we have now, we could just get organized in a different way. My favorite example for this is refillable Coke bottles. So you may not know this, but across the rest of the world, Coke bottles and soda pop bottles are often made of glass, and they get refilled, not recycled. So the glass isn't broken down. They're just picked up, washed out, filled up, and redelivered. This takes no new technology at all. It's kind of the way that the milk system used to work in the United States, where people would drop off milk and get the milk bottles back, etc. It just takes some reorganizing. If we were to think of a way that we wanted to cut down on waste and say, like, we really have to get this waste problem in order, this has to happen, there's no more planet left, how can we do this with the stuff we have right now? We could reimagine, for example, disposable cups in a different way. So if we thought of portable coffee cups, we can say that folks don't really want to have reusable coffee cups around, because the way we've designed it has been really individual, where we ask people to buy their cup, bring it to the coffee shop, get it filled, drink it, and then carry it around in their bag where it's heavy and it can stain your stuff. If we were to try to think of a better structure that makes it much, much easier and more convenient for people to use reusable cups, we could come up with a collective solution and say, what if we had a standardized cup? Like if Portland said, we're all going to share the same kind of reusable cup, and we're going to deliver cups to all the coffee shops where everybody uses the same kind of cup, and you can pick up your cup filled with coffee at the coffee shop, and then when you're done with it, you could just dump it. Instead of in a trash can, you could dump it in a reusing box and say, let's have reusing boxes all over the city, a few of them on campus. And that way you, as soon as you're done with your cup, you can just get rid of it. And then it could get picked up, washed out, and redelivered to coffee shops everywhere. We could come up with stuff that's kind of like this. And this is just a spitballing idea. But we could reimagine things that don't depend on magical technological solutions, and that also don't put the onus or the burden on the individual. If we can come up with structural changes and collective action, it's much more likely that we can get people to implement them. This is something we're thinking about. If we're thinking about a world with no waste, if we think about how much waste is left over from the year 1000 to now, there's actually not much left. There's so few waste left. There's such little waste left that we call it archaeology. We're pretty fascinated. It's like, oh my God, there's a broken pottery shard. It's amazing. Because there's not that much left over. We could learn a little bit from those folks. If we think about how much of our waste is going to be left over for the folks in the year 3000, it's a pile. So some things haven't gone very well in this last 1,000 years when it comes to waste specifically. So we could learn from those folks and say, what if we used a different kind of material? What if we made non-waste the highest priority in our society and organized ourselves accordingly? We might have a lot of people who are processing what we are no longer needing. So for example, breaking things up into different components so that they can be reused very easily. We might have product and packaging redesign. We might have a push for less consumption overall. If that's really what we wanted, we could dedicate a lot of our genius to it. When it comes to thinking about people's daily lives and quality of life, if we could imagine a society in which people only needed to work 15 hours a week to get their basic needs met, society would change a lot. Social relationships would change. You would have enough time to hang out with your people. You could have enough time to actually have breakfast and lunch and dinner with your people. You could have enough time to cook meals. And that would change how people eat and how their physical health is doing. You might even have enough time for exercise. You could work out, right? Human bodies do really well with movement, but somehow we've organized a society in which we're not letting human bodies eat well or move well. And that has really big impacts on physical health. We could have enough time to have hobbies or play with art or go to concerts. The entire society would shift. And so I would ask you, if we could design a society in which we could actually have enough for everybody to live on and have their basic needs met at only 15 hours a week, would that be a high priority for you? Would you like us to organize the society this way? And if we have that end goal and say, we want this to happen, can we reverse engineer and say, in order for this to happen, we're going to need to shift quite a few things around. And I'll give you some of the examples that students have come up with in my class for how they would want to engineer a society to get to that 15-hour week, if that was a goal that they wanted. Some students have said, well, what if we had like a trade-off system and say, if you can give us 15 hours of your week to work on stuff that we need as a society, like we might need farmers and we might need teachers and we might need doctors, if you can give us 15 hours a week to do those tasks that need doing, then we as a society can promise you some stuff in return. We could give you free healthcare. We could give you free education. We could give you free housing. We could even give you free food. When we think of it right now, the society that we've organized only allows certain kinds of people to have food. And specifically, it's the people with money that are allowed to eat. And if we want to dream of a better world, I would like a world in which everybody gets to eat, whether they have money or not. Eating should be a basic human right. And so I want to organize a society that goes in that direction. So if we could say to the people that can contribute to society, if you can give us 15 hours of your week, then we can give you all of this stuff. Housing, food, healthcare, education. That would be a pretty big impact. We could think of some things that are going to be difficult in that sense. It's like we might have to choose some tasks and some jobs that we need as a society and some that we don't. We might say we will need less tanning salons and we might need less glitter pens because we need more people to be doing farming and to be doing education work. And so if you want to do those kinds of tasks, that's fine, but do that on your own time. We need, for the 15-hour work thing to work, we'll need you to be focused on only some tasks. And now we got to think of and say, how are people going to choose their work within this idea? And my students have come up with really interesting ideas. One of the ways that we could do it would be to figure out which tasks are more popular than others and say, we need a lot of folks to be doing farming, or we need a lot of folks to be doing cleaning. And if we don't have enough folks to fill that, we could say, let's compensate them at a higher rate. And say, we could either give them extra money to buy extra fun stuff, so past the basics, or we could encourage them to take on the drudgy tasks by giving them less hours of work. So instead of working 15 hours a week, it could be 8. Or we could have a sharing system in which people do different kinds of tasks. So you could do 10 hours of teaching and 5 hours of cleaning, or all kinds of things. But recognizing that the way that we think of tasks right now is that we tend to compensate people for the more fun tasks or the more enjoyable tasks, and we tend to punish them when they're already doing the harder tasks or the less fun tasks. So if we kind of think about this in a way where everybody actually got to choose what they wanted to work out, like really, really, not in the society that we have right now, people would be very likely to choose the more fun tasks and not want to choose the drudgy tasks. So we would need to encourage folks in a different way and say we could either pay them extra or increase the status of it, or give them extra fun breaks or extra fun stuff, which is pretty much the opposite of the way we have it organized right now. One thing to think about is, as a measure of fairness, is would people want to trade places with each other? Like right now, if I were to be offered a really high-end job, or if you were to be offered a really high, amazing job with a nice upper middle class standing, you would be very likely to say, yeah, thank you, sign me up for that. Whereas if we were to offer somebody who's in an upper middle class position the chance to be you for a bit, they might say, no, thank you. And if you offer people the chance to trade and they really, really don't want to, they can kind of usually recognize that they've been getting more than their share. If you're not quite willing to say, no, I think that what you have is just as good as what I have, or it's not far enough that I could imagine going into your place, we come a little bit closer to the measure of what some folks say fairness could be. In thinking of my mom's example of cutting the cake, right? Whoever cuts the cake doesn't get to choose the piece. In a better society, I wonder if we might design things so that people's life outcomes weren't quite so different, so that they would more easily imagine switching from one place to another. These are all great, wonderful things to think about. And as we're thinking about utopia and the world we want to create, it can help us really think through what steps we want to take to get there, so that we can change things from the root up instead of just making little tweaks that can have unintended consequences.